Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. Today I'll be reviewing another new game for a change. This time it's Squeenix's Triangle Strategy for the Nintendo Switch. I'll keep this review spoiler free, so if you've been avoiding any other reviews, feel free to watch this one all the way through without the gripping fear of being stabbed through the heart with a spoiler. Anyway, to the game. Triangle Strategy is from the same producer behind Square Enix hits like the excellent Octopath Traveler and the Bravely Default series. There's been a little confusion, however, and the game was not made by the same complete team that worked on Octopath. Also, unlike the games in the two aforementioned series, this game is a strategy RPG in the vein of the older titans of the genre, like Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics. It sticks pretty strictly to the general design philosophies of those two games in particular, foregoing many of the modern trappings of the SRPG subgenre that you'd see in newer series like Disgaea. We'll talk gameplay in just a bit here. Visually, Triangle Strategy employs the HD 2D design style that we first saw in Octopath and has since started to make its way into other titles. The backgrounds look pretty nice in this game, but the characters don't come across nearly as well this time. They look a little smeary and much lower res than the backgrounds, with a blurry, distorting black halo around them to presumably help them stand out against the backgrounds a little better. From a decent distance or on a smaller screen, it looks okay, but if you're close on a larger TV, the sprites look like they've gone through about the most basic bilinear filter there is. On the plus side, they do have a lot of character in their design, which helps them overcome their technical deficiencies a little bit. Triangle Strategy doesn't look bad, but it comes off as less polished than Octopath Traveler did. Oh, and performance can sometimes be a problem with this game as well. When you've got a big spell or a large environmental change going on, the game can slow down and the frame rate can chug. It doesn't happen too often, and it typically clears up pretty quickly when it does, but you will definitely notice it. And the last thing with visuals, I'd say it's worth mentioning the camera. It's kind of a mess at times. It won't always move or snap to the exact angle that you want. And occasionally on enemy turns, you'll find that it obscures the entire map and you can't even see which enemy is moving or which one of your characters they're attacking. An obvious solution would have been to allow camera control while the enemy was moving, but the developers didn't do that. Let's talk about sound. On the plus side, a lot of the music in this game is very good. It's not from the same composer as Octopath, and doesn't quite hit the amazing highs that game did, but it's still got a lot of great tracks on its own. The one complaint musically I'd level against Triangle Strategy is that a few of the tracks are repeated way too often, but the songs all range from good to very good, so while I would have appreciated a little bit more, I can live with the slight lack of variety. Now the voice acting is, well, it's there. They didn't forget it. Now, usually I'm not bothered by voice acting even when it's really bad, but some of the lines and characters in Triangle Strategy can be kind of painful to listen to.
We heard tell you'd be here, and we wanted to be the ones to welcome you.
The winds of fortune are blowing today, aren't they, Pa?
In most, but not all cases, I feel like it was a problem with the voice direction as opposed to the acting. It just very often feels like they didn't even try to capture the emotion of the scene that's going on. And it just leads to some weird tones during dramatic scenes that seem significantly out of place. There are plenty of games with worse voice acting out there, but it's often enough in Triangle Strategy that it bothered me, and that's saying a lot since I'm usually pretty indifferent. Sound effects are fine and get the job done. Most of the time they're not overly loud, and the devs have thankfully given us the standard sliders to allow us to independently adjust the volumes of the music, voice, and sound effects. I will add that some of the environmental sound effects, like rain and windstorms in particular, are very good in this game. So enough about the artistry. How exactly does Triangle Strategy's gameplay hold up? Let me begin this portion by saying, if you don't like reading and you hate long cutscenes, this is absolutely not the game for you. Triangle Strategy has some of the longest cutscenes and the most downtime between standard battles that I've seen in the entire genre. You could easily be sitting through a series of non-interactive cutscenes that last for over an hour. You do have the option to fast forward and skip most of them, but you'd be missing a huge component of the experience if you did that. So anyway, how is this verbose story? I've got to say that I actually like the story a lot. It's not an exquisite piece of literature or on par with, say, the top-tier modern TV series, but it's good and has a lot of depth for a strategy RPG. You'll see corruption, betrayal, death, and all the stuff you'd want out of any good fantasy story. I actually wouldn't even mind seeing this adapted into another medium, just to see how far they could take it story-wise. But let's move on to the structure of the game now. Triangle Strategy has a pretty unique structure even for an SRPG. Basically, you have a map of the continent. On that map, you'll see events that you can select. The different types of events are story events, optional story events, character events, investigation events, decision events, and battles. Aside from that, once you reach a certain point early in the game, you can pull up a menu on the map and then go to your camp. While you're at the camp, you can complete some additional actions like shop, upgrade your characters, upgrade their weapons, or even do a slew of optional extra battles that'll allow you to grind for money, materials, and experience. For the story, character, and optional story events, these are essentially just cutscenes. Once you click those, you'll just be watching the game for a while and not doing anything. As I said earlier, you can skip or fast forward most of these, but I wouldn't recommend it, especially not your first time through. But if you're impatient, the ball's in your court. You don't control your characters in these scenes at all. The only thing you can do is press a button to advance dialogue. You can set the game into autoplay mode for these events also. The investigation events are pretty interesting and a little bit different for this genre. You'll get to wander around an area that will shortly become a battlefield to get the lay of the land and plan out some strategy in advance. Aside from that, you'll have characters to talk to and items to find. It reminded me a bit of the Shining Force series, but the investigation areas here aren't as fleshed out as the towns in the Shining Force games. Still, it's nice to have something else to do to break up the monotony a bit. Sometimes in these scenes, you can do things that will change the map in some way before the battle starts. Next up we have decision events. You see, Triangle Strategy has branching paths at various points in the adventure where you can choose one of either 2 or 3 possible outcomes. And you don't get to directly choose either. You have to use information you collected in the investigation scenes along with your own persuasion stats to try and convince your people to vote the way that you want them to. And even then, it's not guaranteed. They may still vote against you, and you may end up on a path other than the one you were trying to get onto. While it can be annoying to have the game basically override your decision, I liked a lot of what they did with this concept and thought it was pretty unique. I'll also add that some of the choices you have to make can be pretty ethically challenging on the player, since there are sometimes no good options. Since I'm keeping this spoiler-free, I won't give you a real example from the game, but imagine a scenario like this. You may have a choice to, say, blow up an entire castle that might kill a few innocent people in it, or alternatively, march on an army that's way stronger than yours and that you have no hope of defeating. Some of your people will be for one option, some of them will be for the other, and then you get to try and convince them to vote the way that you want them to. And let's also discuss the encampment option a little bit. You can enter the camp from any time on the main map by pulling up the standard in-game menu. As I mentioned just a moment ago, you can buy stuff here, power up your characters, and fight in extra battles called mental mock battles. You'll be spending a lot of time in camp most likely. The mental mock battles here generally take place on maps you've already cleared 1 or 2 story chapters back, and might have some new victory conditions. One last note on the map before we move on to battles, you'll have chances at certain points to recruit new characters if you watch a certain character event for a character that is not yet in your party. These become available when you reach certain requirements, like a particular story chapter, and you also meet a criteria of specific persuasion stats. Those stats are invisible to you on your first playthrough, but you can see them and what most character recruitment requirements are when you play a second time using the New Game Plus option. Side note here, you won't get the scouting option to see character recruitment information until you reach Chapter 5 of a New Game Plus, which the game never bothers to tell you. So, you're welcome. Now we've arrived at the meat of the game, its strategic battles. The battles are similar to other isometric classics of the genre from the mid to late 90s. It most closely recalls Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics, which is clearly what it was aiming for. Even so, it's no carbon copy of either of those games, and does bring a dash of originality to the formula. First, all of your characters in Triangle Strategy are unique, even ones that use the same weapon classes like bows for example. Each character has their own set of moves, and it's extremely rare for more than one character to even have the same passive special. For example, you might have 3 archers, and all 3 of them will have entirely different abilities and movesets. Also, each character only gets 1 weapon. You can't remove it or replace it, only upgrade it. You can equip up to 2 accessories on each character, which either boost stats or grant passive abilities. Once you're in battle, things start out simply enough. But by the end of the game, the battles are extremely demanding and challenging. The turn order of all characters, both friend and foe, is always readily available, and you can even press a button to display the turn order on each character on the map, so you can meticulously plan out your character placement. You can do this both before the battle starts and at any time during it. Most battles involve you having to wipe out the entire enemy force, while some end with you killing the boss, and others still have specific victory conditions that I won't spoil here. The effectiveness of your attacks are based on the height of your character relative to the enemy, the direction your character is facing, the enemy's weakness, and possibly even the weather. There are a lot of factors to consider. This game also has follow-up attacks. So if you sandwich 2 enemies between characters that are directly across from each other after your first character attacks, the one on the opposite side will get a free attack that does about half the damage of a normal attack. Beware, however, because the enemies can sandwich you too. And I'll also add that friends or foes with distance-based attacks can also trigger follow-up attacks. It's all dependent upon their angle of attack. One slight negative with the battles is there are instances in the game where it doesn't make something clear to you. So you might not have a victory condition be completely clear, something you can interact with on the map, it may not make clear how to do that, or even in some cases, it won't tell you exactly what a loss condition is. And if you lose, you generally have to start a battle over from the very beginning, which isn't great for a long drawn-out encounter. Now, this happened to me a couple of times through my playthrough, including one where I was doing really well. I was probably about 35 minutes into it, and then something happened that I didn't know would cause an instant loss. Now, the game does make periodic auto-saves and also some quick saves, but they don't really help you in that specific situation because they aren't far enough back generally. All you can do is learn from your mistakes in that case and try to not make them again. And story battles and triangle strategy do take between about 30 and 60 minutes on average to complete, I'd say. And as I just mentioned, it makes autosaves and you can do quick saves if you need to step away and come back later. The mental mock battles in the encampment are typically a little bit shorter than that, running closer to between 15 and 25 minutes. Every story battle has a recommended level, which means the game expects you to grind on some of the mental mock battles in between story battles so you'll be strong enough to complete them. Now, there are a few instances in the main game where there's a pretty significant difficulty spike between story battles that can easily catch you off your guard. And I mean, I'm sure it's possible to play only the required story battles, but most people will have a really rough time if they try and play that way. I mean, we know speedrunners will do that, but I think most people will want to build their stats at the encampment between story battles. One other thing you can take advantage of in your battles are quietus points. What are quietus points, you ask? Well, basically they let you cheat a little bit. Throughout the game, you can unlock special actions that you can do during battle that cost a certain amount of points, and you can usually do these things one time per encounter. And another thing with most battles is that they will employ some type of unique gimmick or sub-objective. There may be objects that you can use from the environment for your advantage, for example. And things like that do help keep the game fresh for its entire course. It never felt like I was getting tired of it on my first playthrough. In fact, if anything, I wished it was a little longer, as the ending path I took, while very conclusive, just didn't feel like it was quite climactic enough. And just how long is triangle strategy? Well, on my first playthrough, with plenty of mental mock battles and me wasting time on optional things, it took me around 41 hours. Without dawdling, I probably could have beat it in under 30. Now, because of the branching paths on that first playthrough, you'll only get to see about roughly 60% of everything that the game offers. And while I know the developers do this to add replay value to a game, I rarely play games with branching paths like this over and over to see everything. So I would have really preferred it if they would have just made it in such a way that you could see everything in one playthrough. Now, I'm not going to hold that against triangle strategy in scoring it, since that's just my personal preference. It's just that I don't see playing through this game the required 5 or 6 times it would take to see every possible scenario. And allow me to elaborate on New Game Plus for just a moment. After you finish Triangle Strategy one time, you'll get the option to basically continue with a New Game Plus. This is your incentive to play through it multiple times. Aside from showing you those hidden persuasion stats, you get to keep all your recruited characters, all your unlocked weapons and class power-ups, all your consumable items, all your equipment, all your abilities, and more. Now it also makes the game way harder, with enemies that are roughly 30 levels higher than they were on the first playthrough. And there you go. That's a pretty complete spoiler-free picture of what you're in for with Triangle Strategy. In summary, Triangle Strategy is a really good strategy RPG that recalls some of the early giants of the genre. Anyone who has enjoyed games like Final Fantasy Tactics will likely appreciate what this game has to offer. Sure, the story can be long-winded, but at least it's interesting. The music is really good, even though it could have used a little bit more variety. The visuals are okay, with good backgrounds, but characters that are overly blurry, and a little bit of slowdown and frame rate droppage here and there. The voice acting and direction could really have used some work. But there's so much depth and so much to do and see in this game that I would easily recommend it to almost anyone. That's why I'm giving Triangle Strategy a review score of 8 out of 10. And I'll also add that I'm smack dab in the middle of my second playthrough as I record this. Have you played Triangle Strategy yet? What did you think of the game? Go ahead and let me know in the comments. That'll do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and share it. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of my videos. If you want to support what I do here, I now have Patreon and Ko-fi pages set up. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.